Welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. An especially warm welcome to our speakers and those who join us from outside of the United States. Your participation is especially appreciated as part of the purpose of this forum is to recognize the unity of liberation struggles around the world and how central LGBTQ plus rights are to those struggles. My name is Cheryl Zur, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign. If you don't know much about us, please check the link in the chat to our link tree, and John will put that in the chat. We were formed in March of 2022, right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. All of our public forums, including this one, are recorded and are posted on our YouTube channel. If you're interested in being on our mailing list for future events, please send a message to John Ryman in the chat with your email. As a content warning, please note this forum has frank discussion of difficult and potentially triggering themes. We urge you to please take care of yourselves and know that the aim of this forum is to discuss solutions and work together to change our present situation, not just itemize problems. So I'm going to do a brief contextualizing introduction before handing the space over to our speakers. Pride Month is celebrated in June in more than 9 countries around the world. These Pride celebrations are taking place at a time when LGBTQ plus rights are under violent attack. These attacks are being led by the same authoritarian regimes and far-right movements that oppose voting rights, democracy, and human rights. Traditional values, quote unquote, is one of the main rallying calls for violence against queer people and the denial of their humanity. Whether it's Christian evangelicals in the United States, Putin and the Russian Orthodox Church, or the Islamic regime of Iran, they all agree queer people and their rights are a threat and must be eliminated. Christian evangelicals go so far as to export their violent rhetoric by shipping boilerplate government policy to African countries. All of that is why LGBTQ plus rights are central to uniting the struggles for liberation globally. Our enemies have united around destroying LGBTQ rights and lives. We must unite to defend them. Since October 7th, 2023, the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign has sought to unite the struggles of Ukraine, Palestine, Syria, and more. One of the most critical parts of this campaign has been to challenge, expose, and debunk the massive Russian disinformation campaign within leftist and anti-war spaces. These disinformation efforts began around 2006 with the Iranian regime covertly getting the Western anti-war movement to oppose war with Iran and endorsing their nuclear program. The role of information warfare and covert propaganda has only grown, and Russian disinformation really took off with the effort to discredit the 2011 Syrian revolution and has continued on to target Ukrainian victims of the Russian invasion and occupation, starting in 2014 and worsening since 2022. Russian disinformation campaigns reach across the globe, and after years of research, it is now well understood that Russia especially targets BIPOC in the West and the global South as a whole. We know that the Kremlin is motivated to explicitly target the global South because it is unexpected for people. While in the United States, we easily understand when Black cops are placed in Black neighborhoods what is actually going on. It is less expected that when media like Black in the Empire or African Stream show up in your newsfeed, that they exist to be a friendly face that lies with a bias that erases the role of Russia, Iran, and China as colonizing forces. Russia and the Iranian regime have far more than just murderous drones in common. They both run disinformation media and influencer assets, while also continually actively seeking to recruit, in particular, BIPOC and Global South activists. So how does all of this relate to today's talk? Well, for those who have not followed the news on this, the Kremlin financially backs many, if not all, of the anti-LGBTQ far-right groups in the USA and Europe, in addition to running interference in Africa and South America. Russia is deeply invested in capitalism and authoritarianism, and thus is dedicated to dismantling the liberal world order, aka the parts of the world where people have voting rights and gay rights. People having voting rights and queer rights is a threat to their existence. and Russia plays all sides. Their efforts at dismantling democratic and LGBTQ rights are fed through the right, left, and center. We urge everyone to join LGBTQ Ukrainians in growing their literacy on this and in building solidarity against this calculated takeover of our human rights and voting rights. In one specific example, this May, The Nation magazine, which has known Russian ties, published an article about the huge uprisings in the country of Georgia, opposing what they rightfully call the Russian law. This article, however, paints the protesters as dupes of the CIA and the United States and includes the fact that they support LGBTQ rights as an example of how duped these protesters are. So typically, The Nation at least feigns claims of support for LGBTQ rights in the United States. But in Georgia, well, those same protesters raising these same demands are nothing but pawns of US propaganda and imperialism. This pernicious flipping the script when it services Russian political aims happens throughout left media, and it's coming directly and indirectly from Russian and Iranian regime disinformation channels. LGBTQ plus people are among the most vulnerable populations globally. If right-wing movements continue to grow, LGBTQ plus people, along with and intersecting with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, disabled people, and chronically ill people, will be the first to be persecuted. In Germany, under Hitler and the Nazis, around 90,000 men were arrested for homosexual activity between 1937 and 1939. And content warning here, many were tortured, castrated, and exterminated. Unfortunately, that's just one example. The same was true for disabled people under fascism. We know that transphobia is used as a form of fascist entryism to slowly gateway people into increasingly dehumanizing politics. As socialists, anarchists, and decent people who want a better world for all, we have an obligation to do all that we can to defend our collective human rights and place special attention to uniting the struggles in order to end the fascist scapegoating of LGBTQ and disabled people. So that is our intention for today's forum, to develop a deeper understanding of what is happening in relation to LGBTQ plus rights in Iran and South Africa, and find ways to bring these struggles to the forefront of uniting the struggles against authoritarian regimes around the world. Learning from each other and having respect and compassion for each of our experiences is essential to uniting these struggles and building a movement that will truly be liberatory for all. We're very proud and honored to have two speakers today. Virginia Magwaza, whose preferred name is Wenjinji, they, them, is the managing director of Parents, Families, and Friends of South African Queers. Raeeka, they, she, is a queer British Iranian social and climate justice activist. Raeeka amplifies the feminist revolution of their Iranian siblings in the fight for a free Iran. They have a special interest in making our movements truly intersectional. Each of the speakers will present for 15 to 20 minutes. Then we will have about 40 minutes of open questions and answers and discussion. We do not organize conventional webinars and want to create a space of open and free dialogue. We will have time after our community discussion for the presenters to make concluding statements. Just a note about the chat. The chat is open and will stay open, but we do discourage using it while the speakers are speaking so they have our full attention. One last note, announcement. On Sunday, July 14th, we will be having a forum featuring a Ukrainian queer speaker talking about what has changed in Ukraine since Russia's 2014 invasion and the occupied territories in relation to LGBTQ plus rights. There will also be a short clip of Canadian-Ukrainian filmmaker Marussia Borsig. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her name. Marussia's film, This is Gay Propaganda, LGBT Rights, and the War in Ukraine, and a discussion with the filmmaker. And I will post a link to that film in the chat. So, Wenjinji, would you like to speak?
At this point, we had some difficulty doing the screen share for Wenjinji, so we went on to Raeeka, and then the second speaker will be Wenjinji.
Yes, I'm a queer climate and social justice activist, and most of my work is oriented around trying to find the intersections, really in all movement spaces, because I think that's the only way that we will truly be free. So yeah, this cover slide is just saying, how can we show active solidarity for a free Iran alongside LGBTQ plus rights? And all of my work is an invitation for collective liberation. And it very much sounds like this space is held in that way. So I'm excited to be sharing this with you. John, could you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I don't know where everyone's knowledge is on Iran, so I'm going to kind of do a 101 on what is happening in Iran, why it's happening, and then link that into the LGBTQ plus rights. So if you know this already, you can just sit back and nod and feel smug. And if you don't, then hopefully I'll offer something new for you. So in terms of what is happening in Iran and how it started, really the underlining point is Western imperialism in the true sense, not in the way that the Islamic Republic would use as propaganda, is the reason that we are in the place we are with Iran. The UK and the US have been meddling since the 1950s. In 1953, there was a coup that was instigated by the US and the UK, and that effectively resulted in overthrowing a democratically elected prime minister. And I'm sure you can guess before I tell you why, but that prime minister wanted to nationalize oil, and the UK and the US were unhappy about that. So they instigated that coup. And as a result of that, managed to get a government that was formed in place that had the Shah, the king, the monarchy at the head of Iran. And because of the way that he was effectively put into place, his power was really granted by the US. And so he relied heavily on the US to maintain and hold his power. So he ruled as the king, the Shah of Iran, for 26 years. And then again was overthrown in 1979. And the reason for that, there are a few reasons for that. One is that I'm not going to paint, I'm not a royalist, I'm not a monarchist, I'm not going to paint the Shah as perfect. He did do some things that were quite oppressive and, really, horrendous, but nothing relative to what the Islamic Republic is doing now. So one, people felt that he was quite an oppressive force and didn't want him in power. The second reason is that he was seen as a puppet of the US because he was effectively put in power by the US. So some Iranians didn't want him in power. And the third reason is that actually benefited the US because the US, although they put him in place, there was waning support over his reign because, again, he wanted to make decisions around Iranian oil that would be better for Iranians and worse for the US. So unfortunately, a lot of this comes down to oil, which is one of the reasons that I'm a climate justice activist, because the fastest we can get off of oil onto renewables, the shorter the period of time that brutal regimes are allowed to come into fruition and to build power. So that's kind of explaining why we are where we are, that the Islamic Republic came into power in the 1979 revolution. And that was really rooted in, first of all, wanting to block the influence of the West in Iran. People were fed up of 25 years of interference or longer than that. And then, as I said, it was also in the interest of the US to get the Shah out of power and to bring a different group into power. I don't think they understood who they were allowing to come into power. I don't think they understood the full horrors of the Islamic Republic. And I also don't think that the population of Iran fully understood who they were voting for, because the Islamic Republic was voted in. But as soon as they came into power, all of the leftists were squeezed out and a very, very conservative rule was enforced. So some people who were hoping for a more progressive government just got sort of pushed out. And it really then resulted in this very conservative theocracy dictatorship of a regime. So there have been multiple attempts at revolution since the 1979 hijack, and we do call it a hijack as Iranians because we feel the Islamic Republic effectively have hijacked Iran and are holding 86 million plus people hostage because no election since has been a democratic one and not a sham one. So there have been multiple attempts at revolution, And the good news about it is that they are getting closer and closer together. So although there hasn't been one that succeeded, the uprisings are happening closer and closer together. So some of you might be aware of the Woman Life Freedom movement that sparked in 2022. And that was as a result of a Kurdish Iranian young girl. She was only 21, Mahsa Jina Amini, who was effectively murdered by the regime. There is a mandatory hijab policy in Iran. She was wearing hijab, but she wasn't wearing hijab to the standard that they would have liked. But the bottom line is, because she's Kurdish, she's a marginalized identity, so they would have been targeting her anyway. And just to sort of demonstrate that marginalization, Mahsa is a colonized name for her, because Jina is her Kurdish name. But in Iran, you're not allowed to have Kurdish names. You're not allowed to not have kind of like an Iranian name. So her parents had to call her Mahsa Jina Amini, but her Kurdish name is actually Jina. So that just kind of gives you a little taste of the marginalization of specific identities in Iran. So she was murdered by the regime because they basically beat her until she died because of her hijab not being appropriately worn. And two very brave, again, women journalists and photographer managed to get this out into Iranian news and therefore into the world. And those two were, as a result of that, were held imprisoned since that date, and actually in solitary confinement for much of it. And sadly, I'm sure were subject to sexual assault and much more. So that was sparked in September 2022. And there was a huge wave of sort of visibility from the rest of the world for about 6 months. And then, as usual, everyone goes back to to looking at something else. And a lot of the world lost interest in what was happening in Iran. And I would say that the energy behind that revolution is still there, but it's just being used more strategically. 20,000 people were arrested. Basically, the most brilliant minds in Iran are sat in Evin prison, apart from the ones who are hiding in the background, organizing, and nobody knows who they are. So still today, the regime continues to brutally oppress Iranians, and it is with the implicit backing of the West. Because they continue to do hostage negotiations and hostage deals with them. The United States has designated them as a terrorist group, but they still allowed election and polls for diaspora in the US only on Friday. Even though as Iranians we say that they are sham elections, and even though the US themselves designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization, for some reason, they legitimize them by allowing them to have polling stations, even though we know that only regime sympathizers would go to the polls because everybody else protested those votes, that voting process. So they are backed with the implicit support of the West, and the regime has, just as a kind of additional layer to this topic of discussion, they've misused the movement to free Palestine to strengthen its propaganda machine. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. Next slide, please, John. So what is life like under the regime? Some of you may be very well versed in this, but I often get a lot of people in my Instagram comments where I do a lot of my organizing completely in disbelief at what is not allowed in Iran. So I just want to make sure that we go over some of the basics. So wearing hijab is mandatory. It's illegal to dance or listen to music in public. You can be immediately arrested on the spot for that. You're not allowed to own dogs. And actually, my people are so brilliant, because what they did for a while to protest this was to get little toy dogs on strings and walk them around town, because the regime couldn't stop them from doing that. So the protesting is very joyful and fun, but obviously, you know, it's serious. They can get imprisoned and worse for some of these things. You can't show physical affection in public, and there is a gender apartheid. So it is constitutionally written in the regime's, documentation, and the reason that they exist, that women are worth half that of men. And that runs the whole way through every part of the way that they operate. So they do not really see women as human beings at all. And that, explains a lot of the way that they behave towards women and femmes. And the same applies to the LGBTQ plus community. So the use of torture, sexual assault, and public execution happens in the prisons on a regular basis to deter revolt. Some of the youth, when they don't worry, they don't fear death. They fear being caught by the regime because they know what can be done to them and how horrific it is. And some of the things that have come out about what Israel has been doing, it's the same playbook. It's the same playbook in terms of the level of assault and the things that they do. Next slide, please. So just to go into some specifics around LGBTQ plus oppression, and again, some of you may know this, but some of this might be new information. Homosexuality is punishable by death, so you can be executed for that, and you likely would be if you were openly homosexual. And something that a lot of people don't know, and because it sounds so disproportionate, people don't believe, but it is true, that those who identify openly as gay or lesbian can be forced to have surgical procedures to have their legal gender changed. So this isn't gender affirming surgery. This isn't someone identifying with a different gender and being supported to change it. This is being told, oh, if you're a lesbian, you need to become a man because then we will accept you. And this is the sort of binary, deeply religious ideology in the most kind of oppressive, extremist sense. That means that they can't hold the in-between. They refuse to hold the in-between. And actually, because they know that if they were to allow queer folks to exist, that their regime would crumble. So they just, force people to either be closeted, or if they are out, they have to have their gender changed legally. And this is much the same in other countries. The third point, queer folks, we're much more likely to face homelessness, poverty, and abuse. Unfortunately, because of the way that the regime operates, and although there isn't a huge amount of support for the regime in Iran, people are much more likely, queer folks are much more likely to face issues with their parents if they're young people, and much more likely to be sort of kicked out of their homes, especially if they are not willing to go along with the farce of pretending not to be queer, because they can get obviously into serious trouble for that. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to cover that piece, because I know this is something that was mentioned in the introduction and that you all are thinking about, is this sort of propaganda machine of these brutal regimes, and the Islamic Republic thrives on propaganda. And this has been absolutely infuriating for Iranians to watch. But the supreme leader of Iran has been saying to the university students in the United States who've been standing up for a free Palestine, and I fully support the students that are doing that work, saying to them that you're standing on the right side of history in his tweets. But on the right, you will see that that very same supreme leader is the one who's authorizing high numbers of students arrested at their own Iranian universities for protesting for their own human rights and for their own freedom. The Islamic Republic funds multiple proxies in the region. It funds Hamas, it funds Hezbollah, it funds basically as many groups as it can, because that's one of the ways that it likes to spread its ideologies. And I'm an Iranian that believes that we need to fight for a free Palestine, a free Ukraine, a free Iran, a free Syria. But there's a very important nuance to understand about Iran and Palestine, which is that 70% of the population of Iran lives under the poverty line, below the poverty line. And that's because this regime, this terrorist government, sends most of their money out of Iran. So they live under the poverty line because it's going to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to everywhere else. So there's a really sort of delicate line for folks to understand. And because of that, people talking about a kind of propaganda machine around, then in leftist spaces, people saying, oh, it's Western propaganda, Iran is the freedom fighters because they're the only country standing up for Palestine. There's a misunderstanding because this regime would never do anything for anybody if they are supporting a free Palestine by funding Hamas. That is not benevolent. That is designed to spread their broader goals, which is to spread their ideology as far around the world as they possibly can. They are not interested in life or human beings. I like to call them a life-hating regime because they prevent every aspect of life that is joyful and happy and just want to crush people's hopes. So it's really difficult to watch in leftist spaces right now and to try to change that narrative that Iran is somehow a freedom fighter because of that propaganda machine and how easy it has been able for them to leverage that with the fight for a free Palestine. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. Just to say that I believe that we can unite all the struggles that we have in front of us. And specifically in this instance, the understanding that a free Iran furthers LGBTQ plus rights. So if we can free the people of Iran, and by we, I mean, if we can force our governments to get out of the way of the Iranian people, because it's really important that it's understood that we're not asking for boots on the ground. We're not asking for interference in any shape or form from the West. We're actually just asking them to stop propping this regime up, to stop benefiting from this regime. Then the people of Iran will by themselves overthrow it. I know that they will. I know that they can. They just need to be left to their own devices to do that. So if we can understand that a free Iran will further LGBTQ plus rights, because once those people are free, there will be some things to work through, but queer people will be allowed to exist in public spaces and, and not have to face the oppression they face. I think there was a poll done a few years ago that said around 17% of Iran's youth identifies as queer. And they are the ones on the front line of this fight in many instances. So I believe that we can unite the struggles by understanding that there are many parallels between our shared struggles, which is why I sort of talked about a free Palestine and a free Iran, and really all peoples that are trying to seek liberation. And a lot of my work is rooted in trying to build that connective tissue, because I really think that's how we will win. I think when our struggles are separate, there's too much space in between them, but when you weave that connective tissue, bad actors can't get through. So a lot of my work has been about trying to make sure that the Iranian side of the sort of free Iran fight and a free Palestine fight are interweaved rather than separate like this, so that the bad actors can't fit between that space. So I am complete. Thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Raeeka. Wenjinji, let's give this another try and see if the slides will come through. And if not, we're still very interested in everything that you have to say.
I sent you the link as well as the slides through email. Did you receive it? Okay, we'll wait on John. Thank you, Raeeka. That was a bit depressing, though, to hear what is happening. And now I'm feeling very privileged, even though there's still a lot of issues in our country, but I feel a bit privileged compared to what's happening in Iran. But thank you for the work that you do. Good evening, John. There we go. So yeah, so that is just my introduction. And also for me, I think yes, the LGBTI rights which I usually like to coin it as human rights of LGBTQ people, because in South Africa, if you talk about LGBTQ rights, you are seen as someone who's looking for something special, as if there are some special rights for LGBT. And also we add an I in South Africa. We also look into issues of intersex because they also part of our community, and they experience a lot of challenges, which are more similar to the challenges that are experienced by the broader queer community. So in my presentation, instead of LGBTQ, I'm just going to refer to the community as the queer community. I know in some parts of the world, the word queer is not a nice word, but we have adopted it into using it as an umbrella term, because it becomes easier when you work with the general public not to mention all these letters. Next slide. So when I looked at the topic, I thought about the fact that intersectionality is very important in making sure that we unite all these struggles. And I think as Raeeka said in her last slide, that in their last slide, that we need to connect these struggles so that there's more voice and there's more strength in what we do. I think we've lost the slides, but
I'm having trouble going from one slide to the next. I apologize.
how is it?
You might be able to just hit your right arrow key
Okay, let me try that.
when you're in it. That's just a guess, but hopefully.
Yeah. It's either that or, John, I think you might just have to scroll down once you open it.
Okay, let's try that.
What happens if you scroll down? There you go.
I just got to hire that 12-year-old and we'll be fine. Okay.
It's like,
Yeah, I'm also using the old, unlike Raeeka, I'm using the old platform. So in South Africa is well known as a more progressive country in terms of their legislative framework. We have the most praised constitution that is seen as very progressive. And in relation to the human rights of LGBTIQ plus people, we are backed by the Constitution, by the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Discrimination Act, as well as the Equality Act. And the Equality Act comes with the establishment of the Equality Court. However, there's a huge gap between the laws and policies and the attitudes and perceptions of the general population. Hence, we experience a lot of discrimination, as well as violence and hate that is directed to LGBTIQ plus people. And also another challenge is that the Constitution is a wonderful book. It has all those rights. However, not many South Africans have access to the Constitution, let alone just knowing what is in the Constitution. Next slide, please. So with that gap between the laws and policies, we see a whole lot of hate crimes and hate speech. And with the hate crimes, we are the highest in Africa with reported hate crime cases, where especially that in high numbers, it affects the Black lesbians, where Black lesbians are either found to be raped, killed, or assaulted, and the murder that is conducted through these hate crimes is very brutal. I think once in a year we would have not less than 4 cases that are reported, because some of them are not reported. So this slide is showing how we have also campaigned against these killings, how we have called upon the government to make sure that they intervene in terms of dealing with these hate crimes. And we see a slight change because the numbers are going down. However, there's been some of these attacks which are very subtle and also very remote. They happen in places that are remote and no one gets to know about them. We've seen the hate crime and hate speech legislation signed by the president just few days before the elections. And many people are saying, oh, just because the elections are here, and then they're trying to get the vote of many people who have been advocating for this legislation. And in the attempt to deal with these hate crimes and as well as hate speech, and most of the hate speech comes from the pulpits in the churches, where preachers will say LGBTIQ plus people are even worse than animals and they are an abomination. We worked with the Department of Justice and we established the National Task Team, which brings all the department of the government as well as the civil society organizations to see how we can deal with the issues of hate crime. And after the establishment of the National Task Team, we saw these cases going to court because we had issues where they never taken to court, and we see the perpetrators having been sentenced. And the sentence that I've just shown there was of a young man who raped and murdered a 32-year-old lesbian in a town outside Johannesburg, which is in another state. They strangled her and they shoved a water pipe down her throat. By the time the police came to discover the body, her stomach was full of water, and they had to pump the water out of her stomach. And that case became a huge case because we followed it up. We made sure that the court seats, we made sure that the persecutor follows all the procedures until we get the sentence. And that was one of the few victories that we celebrated. Next slide, please. So the human rights violations of LGBTIQ plus people in South Africa, they begin from home with families who are finding it hard to accept their loved ones because of their beliefs and perception towards LGBTI people. So as I indicated, in South Africa, the I stands for intersex, and it's important because we've seen or we've had cases where intersex babies are violated just after being born, when the medical fraternity decides to impose their decisions on parents and decide how to the so-called fix the body anatomy of a baby who is born intersex. And that process has resulted to a number of issues that becomes very detrimental to a person's health, as well as their mental health, physically and the mental health. And families also embark on what is called the conversion therapy, where they bring in psychologists and therapists who are homophobic and transphobic, try to this kind of like their efforts is to move a child from being they say to change their sexuality. And they also do exorcism, where they are saying they are praying the gay out, and all those practices becomes very disturbing and resulting to a situation where queer people don't find it safe to be in their homes, especially during the COVID pandemic. It was a serious sad situation because they were forced to live in their homes. They are forced to live with people that did not love them, or that who were not able to express the love for them, and they, some of them were very disturbed in many ways. Hence, we formed this organization that I work with, which is called the Parents, Families, and Friends of South African Queers. Next slide, please. So another point of violation is from the schools. The schools are still conservative, and in the South African schools, we have what is called the school governing body, which is the school, it's the PTA, I think you call it the PTA, where parents become part of the governing of the school. And it is those structures that are actually blocking the situation where organizations like ours, or even the Department of Education, is trying to bring in information around sexuality and gender minority issues, even comprehensive sex education. There has been a huge outcry from the parents that the department is teaching their children to be sexually active without realizing that actually children they know even more than what we know. So in schools, LGBTIQ plus people experience bullying from their peers, but also even from their teachers. We had a recent case where a 16-year-old boy committed suicide because the teacher was mocking him because he was expressing his femininity, and there was a suspicion that he was gay. And even administratively, if you are a transgender learner, it becomes a challenge. You are not allowed to use your preferred name. You are forced to follow what is on your identity document, and that causes some anxieties and low self-esteem for queer learners. And we are in the process of engaging the schools and the department in trying to change that situation. And in the religious and traditional institutions, as I stated earlier, the preachers, they stand there, they say whatever things that they want to say that ridicule, minimize, and condemn queer people's existence, and that contributes to their violation of freedom of association. And with the health institutions, when you go to a health center or a hospital or a clinic, you tend to be misgendered, and there's also a lack of access to gender affirming healthcare, and those that have experienced physical violation, when they go to the health centers, they also experience secondary victimization. Next slide. And then the issue around employment, there's a lot of job losses, less job security for LGBTIQ plus people, just because the law is there, but people have a way of not implementing it. Employers may choose on how to treat queer people, and they also have a way of dismissing them if they feel like the existence of a queer person in the space is actually not according to what they believe and what they know. They can do that, and they have a way of coming up with excuses of why the person was was dismissed. And that happens despite the progressive laws. Our labor laws are actually following what the Constitution says, so they've become very, very progressive. And we see in African countries, it can be done outrightly because there are no legislations like in Malawi, Zambia, and Eswatini, which was formerly known as Swaziland, where there's still criminalization of same-sex relationships, and employment of queer people is a huge challenge. Next slide, please. And so this, the impact of these violations results to mental health and suicide. As I mentioned earlier, that we just had a young boy committing suicide, but also even with issues of cases of suicide, it depends which one is reported. We might just know a number that is less because some are not reported, especially in families where they forced a queer person to not be free or of being who they are. And when they die, they won't even mention that this person killed themselves. And then we see also high job losses and the loss of family security. And the political issues that are related to human rights of queer people include pinkwashing. We have a lot of companies that, like as it is Pride Month, and the issue is in South Africa, our Pride Month is in October. Our first Pride took place on the 13th of October, 1990. But so we treat June as the International Pride Month, and we have our African Pride Month. But the companies and like Woolworths, which is a big store in South Africa, have embraced Pride Month as June, and they have all the decorations around Pride, the flags, which for other people is good, but when you talk to the workers behind that, you realize that there are other violations that are happening in the same company. And so it becomes a clash even within the queer community, because some are excited that we are being recognized, but people like us who believe in the intersectionality of struggles, we argue that even though they recognize us, we cannot be happy only about that without challenging the violations that happens in their stores, in their workplaces. And we've seen in many countries, especially in Zimbabwe, where politicians would use homophobia and transphobia to win votes. And it happened this year during our elections, where the former president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, formed a new party, which is called the MK Party. And he literally and publicly so said, if you vote for me, I'm going to change the constitution and do away with this article that talks about allowing two men to get married and two women to get married. And that also makes us realize that as much as we are enjoying these rights and we are even different from other countries, just like Iran, but there is a chance that we can just lose this right, the rights that exist. Next slide, please. So for me, these international systems of oppression are the things that needs to be uniting us in the liberation struggles across the world. And I take my inspiration from one of our veteran, and the late Simon Goli, who is one of the two people who started Pride movement in South Africa. Who has this famous quote that says, I'm black and I'm gay. I cannot separate the two parts of me into primary and secondary struggles. And this is something that we are trying to instill in especially the young the young queer people that it is not supposed to be only about your sexuality, but you should also look at how you exist as an individual. You are a queer person, but you are also Black, you are also a worker, you are also a learner. How can you take these struggles and make it all the part of you, and also be able to challenge the injustices that they come with it? So, because we learned from Simon Gole that the fight for social justice and social equality demands joint effort. And part of the work that we do in my organization, we also emphasize on allyship. As queer people, we are calling for the general population to be our allies. But also the question is, whose allies are we? How do we join in the existing struggles? And because even as queer people, our existing struggle are not only based on our sexuality, but they are also based on the many identities that I've mentioned. Yeah. This is the last slide, and it's the end, and I thank you. And ngiyabonga, it's in Zulu, Kialeboha is in Sesotho, Alita continua. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wenjinji. It's very, very moving and powerful. Wow, my brain is exploding with things that I want to ask or say. But we're going to open the conversation now for everybody that's here for comments, questions, and more. And we've got plenty of time. And as I said before, we're going to allow time at the end, about 10 or 15 minutes total, for both of the presenters to come back in and make concluding comments. So yeah, is there anybody that would like to jump in? So I'm assuming that everybody knows how to use the raise your hand function, which is under reactions on the bottom of my screen. Okay, we've got Sabrine, she knows. But if you don't know how to use that, just like wave your hands or send me a note or something, and you will get to speak for sure. Sabrine, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, my question is for Raeeka specifically. I guess this is a question that is often asked to Syrian, anti-regime Syrian activists as well. But how do Iranians envision a future after the fall of the regime? Like, what would the transition look like? And what are the logistics? Like, I'm sure you get this question a lot, especially by people who kind of want to discredit the Iranian uprisings, just like they do for Syrians. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to dialogue about that a little bit.
Sure. So I'll start by just naming my positionality, because I think it's very important, and I think that diaspora Iranians have a responsibility. All diaspora has a responsibility to do this. I'm in diaspora. I'm not on the ground. So I have a lot of faith that my siblings on the ground are strategically organizing, and they know what they're doing, and they're very intelligent, and they are preparing the ground for that. But it's difficult for us to have that dialogue in a way that is secure. So there's that element there. And I also think that diaspora needs to be careful not to speak on behalf of folks on the ground, because I've never set foot in Iran. My parents haven't been since 1979, and it's very easy for us to speculate about what we think, but they're the ones on the ground doing the thing, and our job is to amplify. So anything that I do is at their behest. I don't do anything unless they ask me to do it. But the tricky thing that we face is that, much like we had in 1979, where as things were going the way they were, there was a regime or a group that's a bad actor that was ready to step in. There are bad actors and groups already working to try and get themselves organized, even within lobbying groups outside of Iran. So you all in the US, you may or may not be aware of MEC, and they are very good at sidling up to US representatives and building relationships with them. So there is a massive risk that, again, there will be Western influence that will generate more problems here. But I do believe that we have our brightest minds, our political thinkers. They're in the prisons in Evin. They are on the ground strategizing behind the scenes. So while I don't have a beautifully wrapped up answer, I can tell you that my people invented many things. They've struggled for 45 years by dancing in the street, even though they're not supposed to, by pulling along toy dogs to make fun of the regime. I fully believe in their capability to build something, but the idea will be that hopefully as many people will be represented as possible. So how do we make sure the Kurds are represented? How do we make sure the Baha'i people are represented? How do we try and pull that in together in a way that invites, again, that kind of connective tissue? And I know that we have had Reza Pahlavi as a kind of, so this is the Shah's son, for those of you that don't know, who's out in the US, kind of involved in trying to steer things for Iran. And it might be that the people of Iran choose that they do want him to represent them, and that is their choice. But hopefully that will be in the context of trying to bring varying different groups in Iran together, because one of the issues we have is we need to make sure that we can't be manipulated by the bad actors. So not a very tidy or clean answer, I'm afraid. But the main thing is to get the West out of the way of meddling so that our people have got a chance to actually strategize in public and, like in more open spaces than they can right now.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the next step will be to really make sure that it's that no one can meddle in the elections for Iran and for Syria, for everyone, really.
Yeah, I mean the elections in Iran, they're a complete sham.
I mean, not these ones, obviously, but after the fall of the regime, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to make sure that the groundwork is in place so that what comes forward, people can actually actively vote for and choose for. And that will also involve some rebuilding of faith in that system, because for 45 years, we've seen that be something that doesn't work for the people of Iran. There's a lot of pieces of work. And we also have what we call Farhang Sazi, which is like building culture. Like, we are very traumatized as a people. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild our culture and how it looks outside of the regime, because we often, like, we call the regime is called Jumhuriya Islami, so the Islamic Republic, and we make jokes about the fact that sometimes we are Jumhuriya Islami to each other because we're so traumatized. And I think part of that work that we have to do is not political. It's that we have to really deal with the trauma of what's happened to us so that we don't repeat it again. And that's a big piece of work that no one ever talks about, but it is a part of the work that needs to happen.
Right.
Thank you.
So, Rachel. There she is.
I've been on this so many times, and yet I lower my hand, and
You're good. We see you.
Oh.
We hear you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yay.
Yeah, you'll see. Oh, great. So much. Thanks so much from both of you. Really great conversation. I actually had a couple of, sort of one question for each. You can answer in your own time. First, for Raeeka, well, you mentioned that you haven't lived in Iran yourself, but I assume your family, your relatives, you still have relatives there, and or your family had pre-revolution times. I was going to ask if you have direct knowledge of if there's really been like a distinct and dramatic shifts in cultural or legal acceptance of LGBTQ community there. I bring this up in particular kind of as a possible contrast with Russia, a place where I lived for a while, and which is also one of Iran's central allies. And from what I've seen, a lot of the homophobia, whether in the streets or in the halls of the Duma, it's very, very top down and superimposed. Not that the people, like your average Russian, is necessarily like a beacon of progressivism until told otherwise, but most people just don't really make it their modus operandi. It's the kind of the extremism a lot and largely is encouraged by the state. I was wondering to what extent you found that the case from what your friends and family in Iran have said. And
yeah, I would agree that the extremism is encouraged by the state. If you look back to pre-revolution Iran, it was a completely different place. I mean, there's beautiful pictures of women and femmes wearing mini skirts, and they look like they're in Paris. They look, you know, the fashion is like that, and a lot of the cultural direction would have been moving in a more progressive route. And we just went completely backwards in terms of that, the move with the Islamic Republic. There is, and I speak carefully about this as a non-Muslim, there is a bit of, I guess, delicate thinking to be done around what people interpret Islam says to be the case and what the Islamic Republic says. And I always maintain that the Islamic Republic perverts Islam and manipulates Islam for their own purposes. So that's where some of that top-down component comes in. But I also understand that some folks for whom that is their religion, homosexuality is also not okay. So I think there's a couple of layers there that complicate this, that is maybe slightly different to the Russia thing. But I do believe that were we allowed to continue on the trajectory that we were on, we would have been significantly more progressive than we are right now.
Great. And actually, I have a quick question as well for Wenjinji. I wanted to make sure that I stepped out of the room, and I wanted to make sure that you didn't cover this when I was gone. About a question about, I don't know, the continuing stigma around HIV/AIDS presence in the LGBTQ community in different parts of South Africa. How pressing is that? How front and center is that to the to kind of interpret of the culture and of a feeling of human rights and culpability in people's own circumstances? As I understand, that's kind of the legacy of the what's his name after oh my God, I'm drawing a blank of the guy after Mandela. I just read his biography, Mbeke's legacy of kind of demonizing that, and it just never got better. Is that something, or maybe I'm getting that all wrong?
Wenjinji? That was a question directly for you. Just a reminder to both presenters, I mean, it's fine to have these back and forth, but there will be time at the end as well to answer questions for them. But yeah, Wenjinji, do you want to speak to that?
Yes. No, thank you for the question. I think the stigma is now going down. It's getting better. It depends where you are. In the rural areas, it's still a bit of a challenge, but we've seen people accepting that HIV/AIDS is a disease, and it's not supposed to be stigmatized, and they've learned more on how to deal with people who are suffering from HIV/AIDS. And also there's also access to treatment, and many people do take the treatment and their lives are saved. But that also comes with a lot of challenges in terms of accessibility of the treatment, and also how some of the medical practitioners are actually like not really private about who has HIV/AIDS. When you go and pick up the treatment from the hospital, it's not very it's not a respectful process, and those are the challenges that are being raised. But in general, when there is something wrong in the country, LGBTIQ plus people are being blamed. If there's drought, it's because of these gays. If there's a lot of violence, it's because of these gays. And in our neighboring countries like Zambia, Lesotho, many of the organizations that operate in those countries, they come into spaces of working as organizations by registering as organizations that are dealing with HIV/AIDS for LGBTIQ plus people, which becomes a challenge because then it confirms this narrative that LGBTIQ plus people are sick. So those are the challenges. However, there's a huge improvement around issues of HIV/AIDS in the country. Yeah, I hope I answered.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Linda.
Oh, hi. Oh, it's a stupid camera. My question is for Wenjinji. And I think you touched on this. I may have missed it, but in the case of Iran and the U.S. and other countries too, like Russia, the rights of women's rights are mostly under attack by religion, and so isn't and the same obtains for gay and transgender people too. And South Africa, I always thought, I know Africa has had there have been some evangelical churches or even the Catholic Church in Africa that have pushed all, the anti-women, anti-LGBTQ agenda. But is there a different dynamic in South Africa? And does that give, activists more of an opening to try and combat it?
Oh, Wenjinji, you're muted. If you want to go ahead and answer that, go ahead.
Yeah, I forget that I need to unmute.
Yeah.
It goes. So yeah, there is a penetration of the anti-gender movement in South Africa. It's a bit disguised for now, but because we are connected to different organizations and internationally, we learn about these things, and we see now a move from. We have a lot of evangelical churches. We call them the Hallelujah churches, and they preach hate. They have started attacking not only LGBTIQ plus people, but all the gains of the feminist movement that was fought for. And part of the work that we are trying to do with my organization is to raise awareness with the parents that are part of our organization to understand the issues that this organization, the anti-gender movement, is coming with, so that they are able to, because they are also religious and they go to churches, they are able to then defend the situation in the spaces that they occupy. And it is not obviously explicit in South Africa. However, in countries such as Malawi, Zambia, we've seen it even in Namibia and Botswana. When Botswana was decriminalizing, there were a lot of those churches that appealed the ruling of the higher court, of the Supreme Court, in relation to of the human rights of LGBTQ plus people. Thank you.
John.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to give my greatest thanks to Raeeka and Wenjinji for their presentations here, and has really, I think, added a lot of depth as well as knowledge for all of us. And I also would like to thank them for their struggles, because what struggles somebody else does in some entirely different part of the world, it's a boost for all of us. I also have a question for each of them. And the first one for Raeeka is this. When we think about SWANA, Southwest Africa and North Asia, the first thing that comes to mind nowadays, of course, is Israel-Palestine and the disastrous crisis there, and what's just the historic role of Zionism. And here's my question or my thinking, and I'd like to get your thinking on this, that that will not be resolved outside of a transformation of the whole region. And in other words, a new, maybe you could say, Swana Spring, because it would include not just an Arab Spring, it would include Iran. And this is my gut feeling, is that the two countries that play a really key role, or could play a really key role in that, or the peoples, would be Iran and Syria, because those are the two peoples that are thoroughly inoculated from Islamic fundamentalism and also from the influence of Putin. And so they could play a role. And so I'd like to get your reaction to, your thinking on that. That's my question for you. For Wenjinji, I'm going to post a link in the chat. Hold on. This is a video that I remember watching back in 1985 or 86 or something. Yeah, there it is. And it was of the rise of COSATU and the role of the workers' movement in South Africa at that time. And for me, it was one of the things that really made me an internationalist, was watching what was happening in South Africa in the struggle against apartheid. And like in that video, the workers, so clearly express that, see a link between apartheid and capitalism itself. And yet we know that today, with the fall of apartheid, seeing that link, that link has been, I think, seems to have been severed. And we know what happened with COSATU also, and some of the leaders of COSATU. And so I'd like to get your thoughts on the issue, the issue that was raised at that time in the 80s of apartheid and capitalism, and the extreme weakening of the working class movement since then is not something that we in the United States are entirely unfamiliar with, by the way, as far as the role of the unions and the workers' movement. So that's my question for you. And Cheryl, also, I have some comments on the issue of traditionalism. Would you rather wait for me to make those comments, or should I make them now?
Well, first question for you is, would you like Wenjinji and Raeeka to answer your questions right
however
now?
However you and the speakers want to do.
Let's go ahead and have them answer your questions first.
Okay.
And hold on to your thoughts. I also have some similar comments as you about that. But Raeeka, do you want to try to answer John's questions?
Sure. Apologies if you hear a child make some noises. My kiddo's back home now, but hopefully it won't be too loud. I love what you said about being inoculated from Islamic extremism, because I think that's very true. We really sort of see ourselves, Iranians see ourselves as the canary in the coal mine on that one. And that's why we're shouting from the rooftops about it wherever we see it. And, in as much as we can, we will make sure it never happens again inside Iran, because it completely ruined our country. I think the thing that's interesting about Israel-Palestine, I agree with you that the idea of like a Swana Spring is needed. And I can only really speak to Iran's involvement in that. But if you look at Israel and Palestine, one of the arguments that Israel uses to exert so much force is that it is basically afraid of Iran and the fact that and I should say afraid of the Islamic Republic, because we don't associate Iran with the Islamic Republic. Because in their constitution, they literally state that they want to eradicate Jews and Israel. So that gives Israel the ability to say, oh, well, this country right over here is trying to eradicate us and eliminate us. Of course, we can use this amount of force. And they can make the argument and link it to Hamas and the proxies. Obviously, what Israel is doing is absolutely horrific. Nothing justifies it whatsoever. But you've effectively got two brutal regimes doing a weird dance with each other. If you can knock out the Islamic Republic and allow Iranians to be free, that narrative isn't possible anymore. That doesn't exist anymore. It also means that the people that Iran, the Islamic Republic, the proxy groups that they fund, where basically what they do is they look for marginalized and disenfranchised peoples and they radicalize them, that would also not be able to happen so easily. So I really think that when we're talking about Israel and Palestine, I always, I have a long list of ceasefire now, return all the hostages, stop sales of arms. But I always say, stop funding the Islamic Republic of Iran and let the people of Iran dismantle it from within. Because if you don't do that part, the whole thing doesn't work. It's got to be holistic. And that's just like one tiny lens on the Swana region. I think if you look at that through the lens of every country's struggle, that list will get longer. But that would be, my overarching view is the Islamic Republic is a massively destabilizing influence in that region intentionally. And if we can eliminate them, that will massively improve the outcomes for the people in the Swana region.
Wenjinji, would you like to answer John's questions now or at the end? Which would you prefer? I don't think they heard me. Wenjinji? Okay. They have disappeared for the moment. We'll circle back to them. So John, what I'd like to do about your further comments is have you come back and make those, and call on myself, and because I think that we're gonna have some similar comments. Is that okay?
However you want to do it, your chance.
Okay. So I talked about this a little bit in my introduction, but I don't think it can be said or talked about enough to understand why it is that authoritarian regimes and movements are so threatened by the existence of queer people. And if we, and this is my opinion, and it's what I see, it's because those movements and their ideology is inherently patriarchal. And we could say, it requires traditional values, traditional roles, traditional sexuality. And they are extremely threatened by the possibility of any kind of an equal society where people can truly be free to be who they are. And so we could also say from sort of a traditional Marxist analysis that the nuclear family consisting of a man and a woman and some children is the fundamental economic unit of capitalism as well. It's the unit of consumption, all the above. So I feel like that's really the root of why they absolutely must attack, eliminate, have people be fearful of anything that would embrace or accept something different than that. So it's interesting to me. So one of the things that we weren't able to do for this forum, we'll keep working on, is that we really wanted to reach out and have participation from LGBTQ activists in the United States. Because, well, we don't really know how many of those activists and organizations have also been influenced by Russian and Iranian regime propaganda, probably more than we'd like to think. So they separate their struggle for democratic rights, for human rights, from all of the rest of it. And that is really problematic. So those are my comments for now. So I don't see any of their hands raised. So John, why don't you go ahead and come back in and say what you were going to say?
Okay.
Oh, I wanted to answer John's question. Sorry.
Oh, please do. Yes, you're back. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. So John, if you follow the history of COSAT, you know that they went into an alliance with the ANC. the African National Congress, and as well as the SACP. And that alliance compromised the labor movement since 1999. And the African National Congress adopted the neoliberal agenda, which resulted to high numbers of job losses, as well as huge growing or high numbers of poverty, and also the fact that there was also a lot of casualization in the country. And their voices just diminished and diminished. And even this year, when there was this thing about no majority win, and the ANC decided to get into the government of national unity with the Democratic Alliance, which is the former oppressive political party. The alliance members, COSATU and the South African Communist Party, tried to say, how dare you, ANC, but the ANC just don't give any notice of what the labor movement is saying. So it has died the labor movement has died a very sad and slow death, and the workers feel left out because they don't know where to go. And the reason why it died, it's because also now the officials in the labor movement are now looking forward to be corrupt, to get tenders, and they get bribes, and they want to find themselves being in parliament. And we don't have a strong labor movement anymore. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. John, thank you.
Yes. Thank you both comrades for your comments. I should just respond. You know, my introduction to internationalism and socialism was with a group that had a group of comrades in South Africa at that time. They were called the Marxist Workers' Tendency of the ANC. And what they were saying was there'll be no resolution on the basis of capitalism. And, you know, it seems to me that as far as I can recall, the ANC did have, and probably still does have, a kind of somewhat loosely worded clause in favor of socialism, but they never pursued it. And if it's South Africa, if it's the United States, you have to, if you're going to be a capitalist, you have to attract foreign capital. And you can't do that without a neoliberal agenda. So a whole lot of things flow from that, including the Marikana miners massacre. Yeah.
That's it.
So, but the main comment I wanted to make was on what I think is the ideology really driving the like homophobia, or I don't know if that's, or the attacks on LGBTQ plus people globally. And it seems to me that ideology, Cheryl referred to traditional family values, but another way of defining it is the ideology of traditionalism. And if you look at that theory and how it developed, it was originated by a mystic, really, named René Guénon. And for him, it was just all a matter of mystical return to some mystical ideas of the past, and so on and so on. I think one thing, it shows how mysticism can really lead, rather than having a scientific approach, can really lead to the most reactionary politics. And Guénon's mystical ideas were taken up in a practical or political way by a fascist named Julius Evola, who the only way in which he criticized Hitler was that he thought that Hitler did not go far enough. And from there, the modern popularizer of traditionalism is a guy named Alexander Dugin. And if you look at him, he came of age in the period when Soviet society was collapsing, when there was just total chaos. And he reflected a mood in society of wanting to return to the days of certainty. In other words, the traditional Russian society. And today, really, you see capitalist society all around the world, collapsing into chaos. We certainly see the prospects for that here. All you have to think about is one date, January 6th, to get a sense of what I'm talking about. And in the absence of a workers' movement, and with a socialist movement almost entirely reduced to its own little so-called socialist echo chambers, and being overtaken in a lot of ways by campism, then there doesn't seem to be any alternative but to return to these mystical traditional form of American society, some idealized vision of what happened in the United States in the 1950s, which even that vision is totally false and excludes a whole lot of people: women, LGBTQ people, Black people, people of color, and so on. But I think that, in other words, I think that the attacks on LGBTQ people, as seen through the rise of traditionalism, reflect the crisis in capitalist society as a whole, and that we have to link up the struggle against that with the struggle for socialism.
Amanda.
Megan, and then Talmage has his hand raised.
Thanks, Cheryl. I wanted.
Sorry, if I could, I'm going to post links to 2 articles about traditionalism on the chat. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to raise a couple of issues, and so a few things came up for me. So was listening closely to what Raeeka was saying about the need, for the fall of the Islamic Republic as the regime, and the way that would impact Swana broadly. And it wasn't said explicitly, but I wanted to name that, given their ties to the Assad regime in Syria, that has significant implications for the Syrian revolution, right? And so those of us who work closely with Syrians are very invested in that outcome. And so really, and of course, obviously support Iranian people and their revolution, no question, but the way in which that can have a domino effect, everyone would be very happy about. So another thought that came up, we'll see if I can keep this kind of ordered, is just thinking about broadly the role of Russian and Iranian disinformation in the left, the role of Russian and Iranian imperialism, which frequently Iran as an imperialist power is not named. They're treated as this kind of like poor little state that has sanctions from the US, right? And like no one talks about that they are in Africa, that Hezbollah is like in South America, which is mind-boggling if you didn't even know that fact. And then also, I just want to raise for us to maybe have a broader discussion on, but like the role of the boots on the ground in Africa that does not get attention from the left that I am seeing. Like people are not making a stink about Africa in the Central African, they're not making a stink about Russia via Wagner Group, which is now named Africa Corps, which is no longer a private military group, but has been absorbed by the state and is directed by the Russian military, that they are in the Central African Republic. It's the incredible repression, violence, name everything that's bad, sexual assault, the R word, etc., going on there. no one is really talking about, I mean, we see, and this is like, let's talk the disinformation level, right? Where it's like, we got to get the Western colonizers out, the French are the problem, but no one names Russia and their role in stealing precious minerals, right? And you can name like 7 different African countries, again, from the Central African Republic to Sudan. I don't know that they're specifically involved in Congo. I think it's more China that is directly involved in Congo, but we can have a discussion on Russia being very close to the president of Rwanda, and there's like major financial economic ties there. I think there might even be like nuclear power development going on. And then the role that the M23, which is, I understand, Rwandan backed, is therefore perpetrating genocide within Congo. So you guys kind of get the networked direction that I'm going with this. And then, so I would say, I don't know as much about if Iran, Islamic Republic, like the Hezbollah, has boots on the ground in Africa. So maybe if Raeeka, if you know about that, you could speak to that. But I wanted to name it specifically in the context of, we see a lot of the left having generally very good positions on LGBT rights and being for queer liberation, which is fantastic. But it strikes me as, I think we have to have a community discussion with our other queer family in the US and in the West and our queer leftists, that they're missing the boat, right? It's like, if you are only concerned about queer rights in the United States, which of course are 1,000% important, but if we are not concerned about the queer people in the Central African Republic, and PS everybody, right, in the Central African Republic, what are we doing, right? Like, I feel like there's such a huge oversight of abandoning Africa as a continent to other imperialisms, and the way that that is abandoning our queer family and abandoning our disabled family. And, I would love to toss into that mix. Also, we've abandoned the COVID discussion, right? Should we talk about how COVID is disabling people globally still? And the people who are most impacted are those who are most structurally disadvantaged already. So I know that's a lot, but I wanted to try to make sure that that got raised to be on our conscious radar in our discussion. And also, wanting to, I think there was another point. I'll try to bring that back. But anyhow, if you guys want to respond to that or just fold back into the discussion, but thank you so much for being here. I can't say how much I appreciate your time and your words and the education that you're sharing with all of us. And I really appreciate and extend solidarity. And I hope that we just continue building together. It's very meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to call on Talmadge, and given the time, I think that he will be the last commentator or person to ask a question, and then I will return the conversation to the presenters to make concluding comments.
Thanks, Cheryl. Appreciate that. I really want to thank Raeeka and Wenjinji. I just love your presentations, both of you. It brings tears to my eyes, right? To see this level of integration. I lost a good friend of mine to AIDS back in the 1990s, a childhood friend of mine who struggled mightily in San Francisco with the oppression that was going on even in the Castro. And so, it's personal for me as well around this. And the question I had for Raeeka really is, which I totally understand what you're saying about this, is the relationship of the Kurdish issue with the Iranian issue. And I'm saying that because I was supportive for many years for the Rojava experiment, the YPG, and the possible links, which essentially is why Turkey went into northern Syria, which was try to crush that experiment. It was being done by the Kurdish population. And so I'm trying to figure out, as much as I support both of you in the struggles around this, I'm trying to figure out strategically what are the kind of mechanisms necessary to make the liberation possible that we're talking about here. My apocalyptic side, just to be clear, I have an apocalyptic side that says, well, if Israel goes to war with Hezbollah, then that means we go to war with Iran. If we go to war with Iran, there's a possibility the regime can be overthrown militarily, and that could be the same for Israel. And that's why nobody wants to do it, because all sides see that a regional conflict would probably end up destroying all parties at the governmental level. And then I keep thinking historically that, well, the role of war, as even Lenin understood, is to, produce revolutions, is to produce change, as violent and bloody as it is. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying this is what I observe. And I'm wondering if there are other mechanisms that can be done to avoid that allow us to actually have the transformation, Raeeka, that you're talking about within Iran, and the transformation in South Africa that Wenjinji is talking about, in the absence of a labor movement that has been neutered, in a sense, by the processes of capitalism here. So maybe it's kind of a combination. The last point I'm going to make is kind of connected to John's question too, which is, I think many people assume that the gay, lesbian community and the transgender community is unified around the class issue. I think it's a real mistake to assume that. I've watched, in fact, wealthier gays, in fact, oppress people that are lesbians, oppress trans people. And I think that if we don't include the class component into the issue of race and gender and sexuality and disability, then I think what happens is that we end up in the identity politics maelstrom, which all goes down the tube, right? So I think I want to be really clear about that, and maybe you guys can address some of that. Thanks.
Before I return to the presenters for their concluding comments, I just want to remind everybody of those two announcements that I made earlier in the meeting, that on July 14th, Sunday, July 14th at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we will have Ukrainian queer feminist activist Olena Shevchenko in conversation with Ukrainian-Canadian filmmaker Marussia Borsekev, doing a presentation, and we will also see a short clip of Marussia's really powerful film and the link to that. So that's July 14th. And then on Sunday, August 4th, the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign will be having a debate on the really critical question of the US presidential elections and whether or not socialists should ever vote for a Democratic Party candidate. So we hope that you will attend those meetings and that you will help us especially share the event on the 14th so we can have more activists and people attend. Wenjinji, can I call on you to make any concluding comments that you'd like to make? And again, thank you so much. It's been great to meet both of you.
Thank you for that. I think the comments are spot on. I think this is what we are struggling with in South Africa, the issue around, as I stated in my presentation, intersectionality of struggles. Because in South Africa, we had the race struggle in relation to the apartheid struggle. And there was that comfortability that was there when we voted for the first time, and people thought, oh, now we can relax, there are no more issues. But some of us, I also belong to a group of socialist activists. We saw capitalism still existing, and we needed to continue with the struggle in relation to in relation to the have-nots and the haves. And we've seen that gap widening in South Africa, where those who are poor got poorer and those who are rich got richer, because through corruption and also through extractive processes that are happening across the world, and especially with the minerals that are being taken from our countries. But it is said that, as I said, John, the labor movement is not sharpening those contradictions. The labor movement has also relaxed in a way that it's just the few people who are raising those issues. And it is also small pockets of efforts trying to raise those issues. And I agree with the issues of classes. We've seen that demonstrating itself in South Africa, where we have different prides. In South Africa, we have many prides, especially in Johannesburg. There's Johannesburg Pride, there's Soweto Pride, which happens in the townships, and then there are small community prides, which are happening in the small towns. And Johannesburg Pride is about the rich, gay, white men. And when we, as the Black queer people who are more who are feminists and social justice activists, try to bring in the intersectional approach within the Johannesburg Pride, we were literally beaten up by the white gay men, even if we were part of the community. And that shows the extent of how those two approaches are actually not being able to be immersed together. However, this is a continuing struggle. We try to instill these kinds of politics, and now with the uncertainty around what's happening in the country in relation to the elections, as well as the government of national unity, and the ANC exposing itself that it is a neoliberal party, because Thabo Mbeki actually said in one of his speeches that ANC was never a socialist party. They might have that in their writings, but he pronounced it that ANC was never a socialist party. So even the young people now are using the social media and raising all these issues and connecting issues around access to land, issues around access to employment, and issues around access to social services like water, electricity. I was disconnecting as I was in this forum, because now, electricity is going, and now I needed to switch on to the alternative power, because there's load shedding in the country. And it's not because there is a problem, it is a man-made problem because of corruption. So those are, for me, I think the struggle continues, and we need this solidarity. We need more solidarity in making sure that we also try and build a new layer of young people that are more conscious, that are more understanding of what is happening, not only in South Africa, but in the world. I've been trying to get some people to assist me with getting young people just to understand the issue around the Palestinian struggle, because they've been seeing free Palestine. However, they never understood what was happening. And I was fortunate that I once visited Palestine, and I'm also part of the Palestinian Solidarity Committee. But we need a process where we sit with the young ones, or through the social media, where we give them this information, and because information is power. And I'm hoping that we can try and try and build a layer of solidarity around these issues. Thank you.
Before Raeeka, before you speak, I just wanted to say that we hope that this forum will be just the beginning of a connection with both of you and building a relationship. We're a small organization, but we have a much wider reach through our social media. We want to promote any information, highlighting experiences that we can share into the broader world. That is absolutely our intention. So please, we're going to continue this
forum. I'll have some people joining me in the forum. It will also be
great. But yes, we will absolutely stay in touch. Okay. All right. Raeeka, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying I'm grateful for the thoughtful discussion. As an Iranian, I think this is probably the most refreshing space that I have been in with, let me name it, mostly white people who actually have some vocabulary around Iran. Like this is just great for me. So thank you for the therapeutic shot of hope that I needed. There are a couple of questions I'll try to roll up into my answer. So, Megan, you asked if there's boots on the ground in Africa with regards to the Islamic Republic. The answer is yes. I haven't dug into the research too much, so I don't want to speak too much on it because, as you know, I don't speak on something unless I know the detail. But the long and the short of it is yes, they are there and they are impacting the regimes and groups that are doing things there that aren't good. They are influencing and behind some of that. So sadly, that is the case. The other thing, was it Talmadge? I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Okay, lovely. Firstly, don't worry about being apocalyptic. I'm a climate activist, so you can't beat me. And all of this is through the lens of, people say to me, why are you so calm? Like, how do you move through all this stuff? And I'm like, because I know that unless we continue to bring all of our efforts together, the literal world is going to end as we know it. So like, I've got to be calm about that because there's no other way to do this work. And this is a small part of the wider lens. Like, under capitalist, imperialistic patriarchy, we have literally destroyed our livable planet. So when we're talking about Iran, South Africa, Palestine, like, these are just microcosms of the macrocosm. At the end of the day, we are literally destroying our own livable home through our behavior. So I know I'm a bit of a depressing person to invite in that regard, but if I can still have hope and continue to take action, then I think all of us can do that. And one of the ways I think about that is to root it in a few ideas like more is more. Whatever we do is good. Whatever we do is better. Adrienne Marie Brown says small is good, small is all. So even though it might feel like this forum is small, it's not. It's good. It's all. And the thing that we have to remember is that these groups have patiently chipped away at everything, and now they're accelerating. And unfortunately, we were, we should have been paying attention to that, and we should have been building a response. So our response is slow and it's late because we thought everything was progressing and everything is fine. And now we have to understand that, unfortunately, although they may be on the side of the bad actors, they have demonstrated to us that patience and chipping away works. So we have to show up. Small is good, small is all. In terms of like actually what we can do with regards to Iran, one of the things to remember is Iran doesn't want war because Iran cannot cope with war. It wants to posture and and then it will retreat because it definitely doesn't want war. In terms of the things that we can do, and this is difficult because our governments don't want to do this, but we need to have like proper sanctions on the leaders, not that funnel down into the people, but on the leaders. And that needs to include seizing their assets in the West, because they're all sending their kids off to college in the US and their kids are walking around half naked, doing whatever they want. Their assets need to be seized in the US. They need to stop allowing them to travel because they keep allowing them to be on UN boards and doing all sorts of things that just legitimizes their existence. Like, these are actually very easy things that we could do. And by sanctioning the right people, it means that the regime sympathizers on the ground in Iran, of which there are not that many, will start to not see the benefit of being supported by the regime because they won't be being paid supporting the regime. They won't be being paid. Some people are being bankrolled by the regime. They won't be able to get that money. So there's lots of different ways that we can do that. And also, I know there's been some efforts to do this, but actually funding the labor movement in Iran from outside. Tricky to get funds in, but there are ways to do it so that they can continue to strike. Because what we really need is if millions of people are out on the streets in Iran, they can't execute and kill all of them. They can't, we need the population to see that they don't need to be afraid. And that's one of the messages, that one of the sort of affirmations and things that they've been saying to each other is, don't be afraid, come out, come out. If we all come out together, they can't come for all of us. So it's not a clean and easy answer, but there are some practical steps that we can take from the outside. Whether or not our governments are willing to do that is really the question. But I also think that our populations in the West are not educated enough to know what our governments are doing. So if we can really explain and understand, and also for it not just to come from an Iranian, because I'm called hysterical or I'm called Islamophobic or whatever else, if it comes, if we can all collect our own people, so if you all can collect the white left, that would be very helpful in terms of, stopping that propaganda machine from moving forward, because that's been really disheartening. And just kind of one final wrap up, because we're talking about patriarchal, traditional family values. I think that the reason that the LGBTQ plus community is such a threat to every movement is because we destroy the concept of the binary, because there's nuance, there's nothing, it's just everything is everywhere and we're all wonderful. And if you don't have binary, you can't have hierarchy. And if you can't have hierarchy, you can't screw anyone. So I really think that if we've basically been culturally lied to, and if we continue to sit in the binary, the bad actors will win. Social media is facilitating that because it facilitates binary thought. I'd say probably my profile is one of the few spaces on Instagram that attempts to hold nuance, and that's a really big challenge. And yeah, we've basically been culturally lied to, and I think as a species, we have to grieve what we've done. And we have to be able to hold the uncertainty, because the reasons we're moving into these spaces is that we want clarity, we want binary, we want certainty. We don't want to grieve because we've had it removed from our cultures. None of us have grief practices anymore in the West. And what we really need to do is grieve what we've done to the planet, what we've done to each other. We need to integrate that. And then small is good, small is all. We show up in whatever way we can, and we build that connective tissue like our life depends on it, because it does. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, great. Absolutely great. So, well, we hope to see everyone again on July 14th. Meanwhile, stay well, stay safe, and keep fighting.